Okay, so using these two elements together, okay, so you're going to come up what is an exposure. All right, I put together, with my light meter, I figure out what works with my shutter that I want to use or with my aperture I want to use, and I'm going to put that together and make a correct exposure. So once you know a combination of shutter speed and aperture that will let in the right amount of light, you can change one setting as long as you change the other in the opposite way. So what's that saying is like if I'm walking around, I got my camera set to an ISO of 200, and I point my camera at a setting, and I don't think I'm checking before, but like, oh, my f-stop is set to like f8, okay? And it says like, okay, well, I'm letting in too much light. So I bring my shutter down to like f60, or not f60, 60th of a second. So at 8 and a 60th, that's the right exposure. Okay, like, oh, okay. But then I think about it and I'm like, well, I'd like more depth of field. So I bring up my f-stop to 16, and then I gotta like, okay, so if I'm gonna let less light in that way, okay, I have to adjust my shutter speed to let in more light, okay? So I bring that down to a 15th of a second, okay? So you have to keep those things, that ratio kind of working, okay? So think of it as like a bucket of light, okay? So the quantity of light that reaches the film or the sensor inside of the camera depends on both f-stop and exposure time, okay? So if I'm letting in light at 2 seconds at f4, okay, here if I close it down, all right, it's going to take longer to fill the bucket, but I still have to fill the bucket the same way, all right? So here's like, again, these are like artistic decisions. So f16 at an eighth of a second, all right, and that's like sharp, but the pigeons are moving. Here we have, again, this is the same exposure as this. It's still letting in the same amount of light. So f4, shallower depth of field, still not bad. And then 125th of a second. Okay, but that's starting to stop the pigeons. That's pretty cool. f2 really kind of falls apart back here. Not falls apart, but the depth of field is shallow. And then a really fast f-stop. Oh, I'm sorry, keep doing that. Really fast shutter speed, 1/500th. All right, and that stops the pigeons perfectly. So you as the artist could make the call like, well, which one of these did you want to make? Okay? Which one's the right one? It's up to you. Okay? And then we could talk about it as a class, like, well, it would have been cool if the pigeon stopped, or, well, I like that because it looks like some weird ghosty thing. I like this guy here. Okay? Or, we could put this into crit and be like, oh, that's awesome. You got those pigeons perfectly. All right? A little bit about focal length. So some of you guys might have um, lenses that zoom, and what does that mean? Okay, how is that changing the picture? All right, and here's just kind of like a, visual illustration of like, well, what, most of you probably have like, I think like 18 to 50. That's usually like the stock lens that comes with it. Okay. So when you're out shooting and you're using your lens, um, maybe just leave it at like 50 and don't play with the zoom. You know what I mean? And just kind of walk around with it, just kind of set to the 50 millimeter. Focusing your lens. Be sure as you're shooting, you are focusing your lens. Okay? Here's this Leica camera that had a Automatic focus ring. Not really, but it's kind of funny. So what does focus do? Okay, with the camera, as you shoot, you really want to make sure that that first little ring on the end of your lens, you're looking through it and just focusing. Okay, it might be good just to walk around and just practice focusing on stuff before you're even shooting. You're just kind of walking around and you're getting comfortable, like, oh, okay, I'm focusing my camera. Okay, what is the most important part of the scene to be sharp? Okay, what do you want to emphasize? What do you expect the viewers to look at first? Okay, so when we're looking at a picture and we're using that area of focus, our eyes naturally go to that, okay, first, because we're like, oh, that's, what's that? Okay, I'm not drawn to back here. My eyes don't automatically go to like, what's that weird thing? It's like, here, I want to see the dog wearing the sweater, or the feet. So let that tells the story first, okay, and then everything else implied afterward, you know, is like, well, what's the depth of field? Is it sharp from near to far? Or, because when we look at pictures, when I get to something like this, like that's just like that's fun to look at. Everything is sharp. It's like, ooh, that's interesting. My eye kind of moves around almost evenly. Here, he's using aperture to tell a story in a way. Like why I see this boy, I connect with him first. And then I might move here, and then I'm like, oh, there's someone back there. Okay? Here it's like, oh, everyone at the same time. And it's a much different experience. So when we use that, we want to think about how that focus is telling the story. That's telling a story. Okay, so exposing pictures. All right, I think we'll end with this. This will be like 4 short videos. Okay, I'm going to stop here and then we're going to talk about how do you focus? Not focus. How does the light meter work? All right, so we'll come back and we'll start right here.